So you want to know what's really going on in the trucking industry, huh? Well, we've got a whole stack of YouTube transcripts and news articles right here, ready to dive in. We're going to uncover what's really happening behind the scenes in the trucking world, and trust me, it's a lot more than just hitting the open road.
You got that right. We're talking about the human stories, the pressures they face, the stuff that doesn't always make the headlines but really impacts the whole industry.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. This broker squeeze, I keep hearing about. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's a term you hear a lot from truckers themselves. We actually found this YouTube channel, with a Trucker, run by a driver named Alex SM. He's really outspoken about this whole issue, especially what he calls cheap freight.
Cheap freight. I have a feeling that's not exactly a good thing for the truckers.
No, not at all. Alex and a lot of other drivers like him, they're feeling pressure to take these loads that barely cover their costs, let alone make a decent profit. It's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to support themselves and their families while dealing with brokers who, well, let's just say some brokers aren't exactly looking out for the trucker's best interests.
Sounds like it comes down to who has the power, right? So who's really calling the shots here?
You hit the nail on the head. You've got the shippers who need to get their goods transported, the brokers who act as the middlemen connecting them with truckers, and then, of course, you have the truckers themselves. The problem is that sometimes those brokers, they use their position to offer really low rates to truckers, squeezing them to try and maximize their own profits.
That just doesn't seem right. So what can truckers even do when that happens?
That's the tough part. If they refuse those low-paying hauls, they risk not getting any work at all. And remember, these are people with families to support, bills to pay, just like everyone else. They need to have a consistent income.
Yeah, I can see why there's so much frustration. And speaking of real life examples, I came across another trucker, Parma May, who shared a really eye-opening breakdown of how this price discrepancy actually plays out.
Oh yeah, her story really highlights the issue.
So she found this load going from Memphis to Hazleton, Pennsylvania. What really struck me was how there were multiple loads heading to the same destination from the same pickup point, but the rates being offered were all over the map.
It's true. And she actually tracked how those prices changed over time. The initial offer was somewhere around $2,225, which honestly, even that seemed pretty low to begin with. But get this, by the time the last load for that same exact route was booked, the price had shot up to over $4,400.
No, that's more than double. Makes you wonder who's pocketing that extra cash, right? It's certainly not going to the trucker's pocket, especially when you consider all of their expenses.
Exactly. Parma May actually broke it down. After deducting fuel costs alone from that initial low offer, the trucker would be left with only about $12,025. And that's not even factoring in things like truck maintenance, insurance, let alone their own paycheck.
It's pretty alarming when you lay it all out like that. It makes you realize how vulnerable truckers can be in this whole system.
It really does. And it raises some serious questions about fairness and transparency within the industry. Like, could there be a way to give truckers more leverage when they're negotiating these rates? Some people are even suggesting that there should be more transparency in freight pricing, maybe even online platforms where truckers could compare rates and make informed decisions.
Those sound like good steps to take. It seems like the way things are now just isn't working for a lot of truckers.
You got it. And, speaking of challenges that are totally out of their hands, let's talk about another huge headache for truckers, those unpredictable fuel prices.
Oh, yeah. Even if they manage to snag a decent paying load, fluctuating fuel costs can completely throw off their entire profit margin. I can only imagine how stressful that constant uncertainty must be.
Oh, absolutely. And from what I've read, it seems like some trucking companies are turning to technology to try and stay one step ahead.
That's right. I saw something about these advanced transportation management systems, TMS for short. Apparently, they can help truckers find those fuel-efficient routes and even keep track of their fuel consumption in real time.
It's like having a co-pilot who's a math whiz and a logistics guru all in one. These TMS systems are helping truckers adapt to those constantly changing fuel prices, which is essential for their bottom line, especially with the way the economy is right now.
So it sounds like technology could really change the game for the trucking industry, but I know from our research that it's not all smooth sailing. There's this whole issue of AI, artificial intelligence, that has some people pretty worried.
Yeah, AI is the big buzzword everywhere you turn these days, and the trucking industry is no exception. There's a lot of talk about the potential benefits, but also some valid concerns about what it could mean for the future of truckers.
Now, I bet you're wondering about those self-driving trucks, right? That's where things get really futuristic. We're going to dive into all of that right after we take a closer look at AI's impact on the trucking world.
Yeah, the self-driving trucks are definitely attention-grabbing, but AI has the potential to be so much more than that. We're talking about a whole bunch of different tools that could really shake things up for the industry.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of tools are we talking about?
Well, imagine like AI systems that could analyze what traffic is doing, like in real time.
Yeah.
And predict when weather might be a problem.
Right.
And even like take over some of that paperwork stuff that truckers have to deal with now.
Get rid of some of the paperwork, huh?
Exactly. Things like figuring out the best route, managing all the cargo stuff. And even predicting when the truck needs maintenance, AI could streamline a lot of that.
So it could free up truckers to do what they're best at driving safely and maybe even make their lives a little easier.
Exactly. Working smarter, not harder. Right. But, whenever we talk about AI and automation, the big question always comes up. What about people's jobs?
Right, right. It's the robot takeover, right?
Yeah.
Are we all going to be watching self-driving trucks from now on?
Well, it's definitely something to think about, especially with how fast technology is changing. But based on what we've seen, it doesn't seem like those fully autonomous trucks are going to be everywhere anytime soon.
Yeah.
There's just too many things that can happen on the road. Unexpected things, situations where you need a human who can react and make judgment calls.
So at least for now, it seems like the focus is more on using AI to make things easier for human drivers, not replace them entirely.
Yes, exactly. It's more about humans and technology kind of working together. And honestly, when you think about everything involved in trucking, dealing with unexpected situations, making split-second decisions, even just like the human interaction part of it, like when they're picking up or delivering something, those are things that AI just isn't quite ready to handle on its own, at least not yet.
Yeah, it's not as simple as just getting from point A to point B.
Exactly. And let's not forget about all the rules and regulations, too. Those play a huge role in how these technologies actually get used and adopted.
Speaking of regulations, our stack also included some big news from the FMCSA. What's that all about?
Oh, right. Big changes are coming down the road, particularly for CDL holders. The folks with commercial driver's licenses. The FMCSA, which is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, they're cracking down on drivers who are listed with what they call prohibited status in that drug and alcohol clearinghouse.
And that clearinghouse, that's all about keeping those safety standards high in the trucking industry, right?
You got it. It's a database that keeps track of any drug or alcohol violations for commercial drivers. And starting in November 2024, things are about to get a lot stricter. State licensing agencies are actually going to start taking away commercial driving privileges from anyone who is still listed as prohibited.
Whoa, so no more driving until they take care of those violations. How does that work?
That's essentially it. Drivers in that situation have to go through what's called a return to duty process, or RTD for short. It basically means they have to show that they're taking steps to address whatever the violation was.
What kind of steps are we talking about here?
Well, it really depends on what the violation was. But a lot of times it involves things like getting an evaluation for substance abuse, maybe going to some treatment program, and then passing the required drug and alcohol tests. It's all about showing that they're ready to be back on the road and driving safely.
So essentially, it's about accountability, right? And about making sure that everyone on the road is safe.
Exactly. And this new regulation really highlights how important driver compliance is to the industry and to the regulators. Driving those big rigs is a huge responsibility, so keeping that focus on safety is absolutely critical.
I agree. So for any drivers out there who might be in that prohibited category, it sounds like they shouldn't wait until the last minute to address it.
No kidding. November 2024 might seem this a long way off, but that deadline is going to creep up fast. So the best thing to do is start taking those steps now to make that transition go smoothly.
Protect your livelihood, right?
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the difficulties with fuel prices to the rise of AI, and now these new FMCSA regulations. It really paints a picture of an industry facing some headwinds.
It really does make you wonder what the future holds for trucking, especially when you consider how important it is to our economy. How vital it is that things get where they need to go?
It's really true. When you think about it, our entire supply chain depends on those truckers. They're the ones who keep everything moving, often without getting much credit for it.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that. All the things we rely on every day, they don't just magically show up in stores.
Exactly. And yet, like we've been talking about, they're dealing with these really tough challenges.
Right.
And a lot of those things are completely outside of their control. It really makes you realize how much we need some new creative solutions and some supportive policies, to make sure that truckers are being treated fairly and that the industry itself can keep going strong in the long run.
Because the demand for trucking isn't going away, right?
Nope, not at all.
Mm.
If anything, it's only going to keep growing. And that's exactly why it's so important to understand, the human side of all this.
It's not just about the trucks and the cargo. It's about the people behind the wheel, their livelihoods, their families, their safety. It's all connected.
Absolutely. And it's good to remember that these are real people dealing with a really complex and demanding job. They deserve to be heard. Their perspective is important to the whole conversation about the future of trucking.
Couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the trucking industry, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
That's easy. The next time you hear something about trucking in the news, whether it's about those supply chain issues or some new tech thing they're trying, just remember the human element. Remember the real people facing real challenges, working long hours to keep everything moving.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. As consumers, what choices can we make? Or, what actions can we support that would advocate for truckers? Things that would help ensure they're treated fairly and have better working conditions, because they really do keep the world moving.
It is something to think about.
Definitely food for thought. Until next time, happy diving.